Well, good evening. It's a joy to be with you tonight to present to you the report of some activities that I was involved in Africa over the last couple of weeks. In the book of Acts, chapter 14 and verse 27, as Paul and Barnabas returned from their journey of preaching, checking on brethren, they came to Antioch, from which they'd been sent out, and it says in verse 27 of Acts 14 that when they'd come and gathered the church together, they reported all that God had done with them and that He had opened the door of faith to the Gentiles. So we're happy this evening to be able to come and report all that God has done with us on this recent trip to Africa. I want to say, first of all, to the church here, thank you for sending me. Thank you for your love for brethren in faraway places and for souls, many of whom, of course, we'll never meet, but whom we love in truth. Thank you for your interest in sharing the gospel here and abroad. And I owe so very much to this group enabling me and helping me to do things that, as a boy, I could only dream of. So I appreciate your love very much in the gospel. We planned a trip, myself, Joe Greer, Tad Corder, and also tagging along with us for part of it in the Zimbabwe work, Kenny Moore and Lowell Salee this year. Planned a trip to Zimbabwe and Zambia. It's quite involved as far as travel is concerned, quite involved and complex as far as some of the work that we wanted to accomplish. And I'll try to relay what we did and what we tried to accomplish. Again, at least the people that were with me, it wasn't always the same group of guys all throughout, but we'll try to share with you what was done. We left, four of us, myself, Joe, Tad, and Lowell, left June 24th, which was on a Monday, out of Atlanta to fly across to Johannesburg, South Africa, and then into Zimbabwe. While we were in the Atlanta airport waiting to catch our flight, we received word that after 11 years of using the United States dollar to trade with in Zimbabwe, on that day, trading in the U.S. dollar was banned in Zimbabwe. While we were sitting in the airport, we learned this. To say the least, there was an extreme amount of concern and consternation on our part. We were carrying U.S. dollars. How would it be when we got there? Would we be able to use them? Would we be able to trade with them? A lot of questions that we didn't know. Greg Nix was traveling through the airport at the same time, and we were sitting there discussing it, and he was kind enough to come by and hold our hands for a little while we thought about if we should even go. And we thought about it and prayed about it and discussed it, and we decided, well, we'll go ahead and try it. And if we got to South Africa and discovered that we couldn't go into Zimbabwe, that there were problems there, that maybe rioting in the street, that we didn't know what was going to happen. So in faith, we went ahead and flew over to South Africa, and we thought, well, if we got there and you couldn't go to Zim, we could do work in South Africa for a week if we had to. We could preach. We know some people there. We could preach there. But thankfully, the Lord was with us, and we had another pretty heartfelt conflab after we got to South Africa. We decided we'd go ahead and do the work that we planned to do and that God would be with us. And He was. And we're thankful for that. So we go from Atlanta, we land in Johannesburg, South Africa, the four of us. And from there, I was to take Lowell with me and go to Harare, and Joe and Tad were to go to Bulawayo, opposite sides, really, of the country of Zimbabwe. We had really different works to do. Lowell, the congregation he works with, of course, is Anderson Church of Christ out here in Anderson, Alabama. They're supporting a brother there, and Lowell was wanting to see him and see the work on the ground, and so I was taking Lowell with me to become acquainted with the work on that side, that eastern side of Zimbabwe. Joe and Tad had work to do in Bulawayo that was very vital, and they were going to see at least one of the men that we support over there, Big Boy Dubé, and have a good bit of work to do with studies with brethren over on that side. So we separated for a couple of weeks, and as I said, I took Lowell with me. But when we landed in South Africa, we got a chance to be with the four guys that flew us over there. It's kind of an unusual shot, but there's the four of us and the four of them. And of course, they're just the co-pilots. God was the pilot the whole way for all of us, so we're thankful for that. But going back to this shot, the plan was to again go to Zimbabwe and work for a week, and then we're going on, Joe and Tad and I, the following week, we go to Zambia and do some work that's planned there, and I'll talk about that in the last half of the presentation. So, the work that we're supporting in Zimbabwe, the Eastside Church of Christ supports 10 evangelists in Zimbabwe, and here are their locations as you see on the map. Tinson Mangwanyana at Victoria Falls, who has been here. Big Boy Dubé works in Gwanda. I did not see Big Boy this trip. As I mentioned, Joe and Tad were with him for several days, and we'll get some reporting about that from their work. I did see Tinson later on. He met us up in Zambia, and I'll explain that in a little while as well. But one of my goals was to be with these other 8 men that Eastside supports, and I'm happy to report that I was able to be with all 8 of them, that talked with them, talked about their work, talked about their needs, and I would say that they all expressed great appreciation for you, for your support, for your love for them. Every one of them expressed that. And the way that I was able to be with most of them and all of them at once was that we went to Harare and we planned a preacher study there. And we invited those 8 guys along with 22 other guys to meet Lowell and I for a couple of days in Harare and just study the Bible together and talk together about the work in Zimbabwe. And we had a very successful time in doing that. Harare is the capital city of Zimbabwe. It has about 1.5 million people. So Lowell Salee and I arrived Wednesday, June 26th, to conduct these studies with the preachers on the eastern side of Zim. We met with 30 of them. There are probably 30 or 40 more that we could have met with. Space limitations and the kind of men that we wanted to talk with sort of limited that number, as well as monetary concerns. I'd ask Reason Marara, who I worked with for my time there and whom we support, to help arrange these studies. I asked him to invite men to these studies who are mature in the faith, faithful gospel preachers, men who were receiving support from the United States, men that we could talk with in a mature way about the work there. And so those are the 30 guys that we met with. You might notice, for those of you who are Doctor Who fans, that there's a Dalek that is the control tower of the airport there in Harare. I thought that was somewhat interesting. But there you see in the picture below the 3 men that we worked with extensively during our week there. On the right of that picture is Reason Marara, who I was with the entire time. Taka and Try Moore are the 2 other guys. These men are supported by Anderson and College View, and that's the interest that Kenny Moore and Lowell Salee have in going there. So Lowell's going to join us in a couple of days after this and be with us for some of the work that's being done. So the first thing we do is we start with these studies in Harare. The brethren there were very attentive, very active in our studies. A lot of good information exchanged, not only coming from us in teaching God's Word, but coming from them and responding to how that Word could be applied and the application to it in their work. We talked about leadership from the book of Nehemiah. Lowell covered the epistle of James for the brethren there, a very practical study. And then I spoke with them about the responsibilities of preachers who receive support. Part of that was in a lesson that I preached the week before I left here, which you all have heard. We did have issues, as we always do in Africa, especially in Zimbabwe, electrical outages every day, where there'd be no power. There was no hot water in the place that we were staying where we were having these. I took a shower out of a water bottle the first actually 4 days that we were in Zim, but that's a common thing over there. We're lucky to have a water bottle to take a shower out of. So we did that, but that was fine, and everything went very well, as I said, with the studies. Here's Lowell teaching on the Epistle of James, and these men, as I said, they love the Word of God. They're mature preachers. They want to develop. They want to do even better than they are, and they were extremely attentive, involved in our studies. We were very happy with the way all of that went. Here's the whole group except for maybe two who were taking the pictures outside after we'd studied together for a couple of days. And here are the 8 men whom I met with that we support, going from left to right, Tawanda, Chakata, then Innocent Shaninga, Kudakwashi Ben-Guri, Reason Marara, Shepherd Maviza, there's me, Everson Duarte, Clinton, and Russell. These are the men supported by Eastside. All of these men are doing good work. They're actively involved in bringing the lost to Jesus. They're actively involved in stabilizing and strengthening the churches that they work with. All of these men are living on the cusp of poverty and deprivation. We are supporting them as we can, but they're still living in poverty. None of them is well off. None of them is receiving more than they should. They all love the Lord. They love the souls of men. They love fellowship in the gospel of Jesus Christ. And it was a privilege to be with them for these short times and to hear about their work and their struggles and their needs and their labors. And we'll talk maybe some more about that as we go further along. We left the brethren by and large in Harare after a couple of days, and I wanted to go out and see the work that Reason was doing since he was sort of my chauffeur for the time. And I'd been out to part of the area where he was before, but if I show you this on a little bit different map, here we are in Harare. Here's Reason, who's living in Marera. He works with two congregations, Shevanawa and Kambarami, and those churches, he shares some of the work there with a fella that we don't support, but is a good guy by the name of Tafadzwa, and you might see him in a couple of pictures in a couple of minutes. But I wanted to go out and see the work where Reason was. So that Friday afternoon, we go out to Shevanawa, and here are the children at Shevanawa on the right. The next day, we're going to go out to Kambarami and visit the church there. That's the other church Reason does some work with his partner Tafadzwa. The children here at Eastside, as some of you know, worked and saved and got funds to send over to the children in Zimbabwe. And I thought it would be good if the funds that they sent could be shared with the two congregations there. So that money was given to Reason because it was in U.S. dollars, which are no good over there. Reason had to, I think, transfer it over, and so he couldn't take care of that the day I was there. But the following Sunday, on July 7th, you see the distribution of that money to those children. Now, I can tell you that while I was there, I told the kids that something was coming from the kids here, and they were, I think, quite excited about that. And you can see there's some happiness and wondering, what am I going to do with all of this, probably on their faces. They were very, very grateful for the love that was expressed. We had a good couple of days just meeting with these brethren. On the left up here, you see Reason with one of the elderly brothers. You might remember a couple of years ago I was here, and there were 3 old men that walked several miles to every service. One of them has since passed away. The other one couldn't come on this day. It was a Friday, so he couldn't make it. But here's one of those 3 guys posing with Reason. He's up in his 80s, I believe, and walks this far distance to every service he can make it to. Faithful brother in Christ. I also took a picture of some of the elderly ladies there. They wanted their picture taken, so had to take that. There was a good group that met on Shevanawa on that Friday. And Lola and I both preached, and they were very receptive to the word. One of the ladies brought me, as if I was going to bring them back to America, 4 of the biggest avocados I have ever seen. And that was my payment for preaching that day. And then another lady brought a big bag of, they call them ground nuts, but they're peanuts, a big bag of peanuts for us as well. So again, that was the wonderful payment we received for preaching. The other picture is of the children at Kambarami, and that was the next day, that Saturday morning, just a great number of them meeting with that relatively new church at Kambarami that Reason and Tafadzwa have started. I will say this, and I'll talk more about it later, I think, if I have time. There's a desperate need for Bibles in the native tongue in both of these churches, especially in Kambarami, where you have many new converts. And that need, I think, we're going to be able to meet in short order. But it's very important, of course, that these brethren have access to Bibles as they grow in the faith. And that's something that we're going to be able to do, thanks to your generosity, many of you individually. The church at Kambarami meets in a schoolhouse, so they have a little bit better place to meet than the brethren at Shevanawa, who are just meeting under a grass hut, basically. It's an elementary school, I believe. They have a place to baptize, and I took a picture of that, as do the brethren at Shevanawa. There's a river that runs right by there, so when you see baptisms going on, it's in these two rivers. You see some of the ladies there, but with the reason I showed you this picture here is I think that's about the only two Bibles in that congregation. There may be one or two more, but they're in desperate need of the Bibles. And you see the road there that I took through the windshield on the way out to Kambarami. It's out there a little ways in the bush. Good time there. We spent some time in this region, also in Reason's house, visiting with him and his wife Angela. We went over and visited with Tafadzwa and his wife and children and their family as well, saw how they were living, saw their needs, and spent a good bit of time with them that Friday. And then the Saturday we visited with Kambarami. And then we went back to Harare to pick up Kenny Moore. Kenny couldn't come over with us. He had other obligations, but he came a couple of days later, so we picked him up at the airport in Harare. And we traveled down to Mutare, where there was much work for both Kenny and Lowell and myself and Reason to do, as I'll show you momentarily. So Kenny and Lowell are going out with Trimore and Taka. If you're on Facebook, you probably see Trimore and Taka a lot. It seems like they are reporting every week about a large number of baptisms that they are doing or witnessing in their work. And I can only say this: many brethren over here have doubted that those are real pictures, that is real work, that those are real churches. They're real. Those men are on fire for the Lord, and they're so actively working and bringing many, many to Christ. I'll say this: Kenny and Lowell got down to Mutare and went out with Trimore and Taka, and Trimore and Taka wanted to take them to see all of the works that they're involved in and all that they're doing. The first place they went, two congregations had to meet together, so to conserve time, First place they went. What would you expect if you're having a couple of guys reporting 10, 15 baptisms every week, and you went to a church where they're working? What would you expect to see? Well, you expect to see a few Christians there, right? A few folks. How about 700 people? Many of them new Christians. And it went on like that for 2 days, with Kenny and Lowell going around with Trimore and Taka and seeing the work that they're doing. It's glory to God. I was able to go out with Reason and visit some work that Russell is doing. Russell is one that we support, but somebody I haven't been able to get close to and make a lot of contact with and visit his work. And so one of the missions sort of for me in this trip was to be with Russell. Also, as you'll see, Russell is working in an area called Chimanimani. This area was hit by the Hurricane Idai, about 3 or 4 months ago. There was massive devastation in this area, and Russell has carried out some relief to this area. So we were interested in seeing how bad is it? What are the needs of our brethren there? And that's part of the reason that I'm going, and reason Marara and I go out with him. So here's our team of 6, basically. You see Trimore and Taka, Kenny and Lowell, and myself and Reason here together. We spent some time together, worked hard in this area. So here we are the next day. Reason's driving. I'm going out with Russell, his wife Neorazzo, their daughter Innocencia, and Robert and Nigel, who are co-workers in the vineyard out there. We're going out with these folks to Chimanimani. This is Sunday, June 30th, when Kenny and Lowell are going and looking at the work of Trimore and Taka. The area of Chimanimani is remote. It's about a 2-hour drive from Mutare, 45 minutes of it over some of the roughest roads you'll ever be on in your life. It's rocky, it's barren in a lot of areas. You wonder how anybody could live here, but it was hit hard by this hurricane, Hurricane Idai, as I mentioned. And this is part of that road to Chimanimani. What you're looking at here used to be a beautiful river with river bottom land on either side, where most of the farming in this region was done until March of this year. When the hurricane hit, it rained for days and days. This river became a torrent. All of that good farming river bottom land was washed away and was replaced by these rocks that you see having been washed down from the mountains. Their entire means of growing crops and livelihood in this area has been completely wiped out. That's just one of the issues that people in this area are facing, and some of them are our brethren. Life, to put it mildly, was difficult before this. It becomes well nigh impossible now for these brethren just to survive, scrape out a living. If you can see, again, what you're looking at, all of these rocks were not there before. All this area is where they used to farm. All this area is where they used to farm. This river is the size that it's supposed to be, but you can see where it is way out of its banks and it washed all of this out during the flood. That's a cow. That's how big that's the area that you're looking at. This is a huge flood that came down through this area. There was some disappointment this day. It was a Sunday and the saints were supposed to meet. A man by the name of George, they meet at his place. He has moved out to this area after he lost his job in town, tried to eke out a living, and he wanted Russell to come out and begin a congregation here in Chimanimani, and Russell has done that. But this day, unbeknownst to us, the day before, they got word that food was being given away, mealie meal was being given away by the World Food Organization, and that there were names on a list, and if you were on the list, if you would walk several miles to a distribution center, you could get a free bag of food. Now, I just went through how people can't grow their stuff. People are without food in this area. You understand why? Most of the congregation did not meet, was not there for this service, because they'd walked the several miles to go get a bag of food on Sunday. And you might say, well, what a terrible thing for them to miss worship service. What would you do? It's a terrible thing for them to miss worship service. It's a terrible thing for people to starve too. I felt bad about it. It was a long way out there. Reason was disinclined to try to drive out there again the next day. And we weren't sure we could get fuel to do it. But we agreed that if we could get fuel to do it, we'd go out the next day and perhaps get the rest of the church together. I'd gone all this way to see the fruit of Russell's work and was unable to see what I wanted to see that day. So the next day, we do it all over again. And it's much more successful. The work was as Russell had reported it. There are about 40 people in this congregation, most of them new converts, many that Russell has brought to the Lord. We were happy to see them. We're happy to see some men in the congregation. It's always a good sign, and it's not just women and children, but there are men who are involved in it, and that is a good thing as well. Here you see in the bottom picture, Reason translating for me. I preached a couple of lessons. The brethren there would have liked us to stay longer and preach a couple more lessons, but we needed to get back on that day. But it is a good, legitimate work that's going on with true Christians that are meeting in this area, and we're thankful to God for that. This is a picture of Reason talking with Russell and George, who's the guy that lives out there where the church meets. And The bottom picture was just as the saints were gathering on that Monday. A few of the ladies had come already, and a couple of turkeys as well. The turkeys stayed for most of the service, by the way. So I don't know what to make of that. Maybe turkeys like to listen to me preach. I don't know what that says about you. So, in any case, we did have a good day. Russell has a car, and I just going to remind, I can't spend all the time telling you. Some of you may remember he was in a terrible auto accident about 2 years ago, and that car was demolished. The person who demolished it gave him this car that he now has, which isn't much to write home about, but it can get him around from place to place. The tires on it were steel, showing the steel belt all the way around. He had driven up to Harare, the 3-hour drive up to Harare to the preacher's study to be with us up there on those tires. So I told him not to drive another kilometer on those tires, and we got him some tires to put on that car. So that's what you see. There you see him and his daughter in front of their small house back in Mutare, which, as I said, is about a 2-hour drive away from the work that he's doing in Shamanamani. But we got to know him better. Our work ended then. We went back to Harare. We flew out of Harare. We went back to Johannesburg. If you're looking at the map, you might think, well, look, you're just going to go up here to, Zambia and do your work up here, and that's not that far. But if you don't know you can get gas and you have to cross a couple of border crossings and you don't have a vehicle, that you might as well, sprout wings, because you can't do that. And so for all of those reasons, we decided to fly back to Johannesburg and then fly up to Lilongwe in Malawi, which is very close, as you'll see, to Chipata, Zambia, which was our goal. So what happens is we get down to Johannesburg, South Africa. We say goodbye there to Kenny and Lowell, who come back to the States. And Joe and Tad and I then regroup and head up to Zambia. Here's a picture of Zambia. Here is Chipata, where we've been invited to work with Christopher Banda. Christopher Banda is a faithful preacher, but he's in an area where so many brethren believe in sponsoring churches. They don't know the truth about the organization, the work of the church. They don't understand Bible authority. And so Christopher has been working on teaching that there. He wants us to come to teach a good many brethren about this, preachers that he can get even from institutional backgrounds and institutional churches to come together to hear us teach about these things and maybe spread the truth about that in this region. So we fly into Lilongwe, where we're met by Larry Vinson. Now, Larry Vinson is from Madison, Alabama, and grew up in Columbus, Georgia, but spent many of his formative years here in North Alabama, was a member of the Hughes Road congregation, and has for several years now been working in Malawi, evangelizing there. Larry does amazing work. He has, as a result of his labors, again, hundreds of Malawians and people from Mozambique. There are several churches in Mozambique that he's helped plant. He's doing tremendous work. But he agreed to pick us up and take us over the border to Zambia so that we could do our work and help us with that for a few days. So we're so thankful for Larry. And if he realized what he was getting himself into, he might have wanted to back out. But this became much more difficult than any of us imagined. The day we got there, Malawi had recently had an election that didn't go everybody's way, that many Malawians felt was stolen from them, and so they were protesting in the streets. Larry said, it's going to be okay. We're going to get out of the capital city, we'll be fine. But we weren't. As we approached the last border town before getting into Zambia, crowds gathered, and actually we went through a little town and there were literally thousands of protesters lining the streets. We got through the town, we thought we made it through, and we came to a place where there were roadblocks. People had dragged trees across the road, put rocks in the road, and some of the women and children warned us that up ahead there were roadblocks and they were throwing rocks at cars, and it would be quite dangerous to go that way. So I won't give you all of the ins and outs of it, but we spent some very tense time going by dirt roads some good distance to get around the roadblocks, get around the rioting, to avoid that. In this particular picture, we thought we made it around it, and we come back out to the tar road, and what you see is trees across the road here. There's a truck across the road there. That's a fire with smoke up there. We were pretty sure we didn't want to travel through all that to get to the border. So again, we go around a long way. God being with us, we made it through. And He was with us the entire way. We're thankful for your prayers. So we make it into Zambia and met up with Chris. Here's Joe and Tad talking to Christopher Banda. We met him in Livingston last year. He traveled all the way across the country to be with us there. Again, he's a friend of Tinson. Tinson also meets us up here to help us with this work. Tinson stayed after we left to do even more of this kind of work in this area of Zambia. Chris is very determined to stand for the truth of the work and organization of the church, and we were really happy to be able to work with him for these few days. So we have these classes in Chapata, Zambia. We're at an inn called Pineview Inn, Friday and Saturday, July 5th and 6th. Joe, Tad, and I taught these lessons that we've taught in Zimbabwe over the years to stabilize the churches there on these issues. We talked about following the pattern of Bible authority, the work of the church, the work of preachers, problems with the sponsoring church arrangement. We had, again, about 25 to 30 preachers, many of them from institutional type backgrounds who are coming to these classes, willing to listen to us teach about this, learning things that they had never heard before, thanking us for learning these truths. We don't know if they're men of enough conviction to do something about it when they get back to their congregations, but I can tell you this, they learned truths about these things that they had never heard before. They accepted the truths, they saw the truths as we taught them, and we feel like that God's will was done in bringing the truth about some of these issues to these men. Several preachers who studied with us have had a relationship with the Chapata Bible College, which is a church-sponsored school which trains, supports, and sometimes assigns preachers to their work. This is obviously an unscriptural pattern of work. Several of these men had been, even some of them, taught at this school. Some of the men that we were teaching this week. Because of the lack of understanding concerning how the work of the church is to be supported and organized, there were all sorts of questions and irregularities that we encountered among these men. We had questions like, can a church do fundraising apart from the Sunday collection? Questions like, can a church farm to earn money? Can we go out and farm and raise crops to earn money to do the Lord's work as a church? Can the church lend money so you have a treasury? Can you lend money to your members and charge interest to gain money for the work of the church? These questions to most of us here this evening have obvious answers. To these men, there were not obvious answers because they had no understanding of how to establish Bible authority about anything. They were pleased to help learn, to be helped to learn how the Bible authorizes the work of God's people. And I believe these questions were raised, they were answered in no uncertain terms and clearly using Scripture. Again, these brethren saw the truth. What they do with it in future days is yet to be determined. Tinson stayed on for a week or so. He's going to another area to teach these same things. We had a lot of time to talk to these men. There were meal breaks that provided opportunities for discussion and getting to know one another, and we had several one-on-one conversations with some of these brethren about a lot of these issues. The brethren were really happy to receive the study materials that we provided. Some really good books by Bob Harkrider on sound doctrine and authority and the work of the church and things like that we purchased and gave to every one of them. You see one or two guys you might recognize. There's Tinson in the middle of this group. But a lot of these guys were guys from Chapata who'd come and were very receptive to all of that. After those classes were over, we worship with the church where Christopher Banda preaches and where he is also an elder. It's called Impenzini Park in Chapata. We were there last Sunday. Tinson and Vimbai again visited. Chris Banda unfortunately, on that Sunday, received word that his mother had passed away, and he had to leave that afternoon to go to the funeral, which was, I think, a couple hundred miles away. So he was not able to be with us on the following Monday, which he'd planned to be. So still, we did some work the following Monday. There was a baptism in Chapata that Sunday. Here we're going out to the river for the baptism. It was obviously very exciting, inspirational time, and we enjoyed being with them for that very much. On Monday, we had a series of lessons for families there in that church in Penzini, in Chapata. We were pleased to see the number of families, husbands and wives, parents that came out. There was a good number that came out that evening to hear us talk about God's will for the family, husbands and wives and parents, and they enjoyed that. I tell you what, brethren, Africa is a world away from the ease and comfort that we take for granted. If you think you're seeing a young boy selling mice on a stick, you are. It's on the road in Malawi. It's what they eat, because that's what they have to eat. If you think you're seeing young women carrying, hard telling how many pounds of firewood on their heads, you are. If you think you're seeing a man riding a bicycle with 4 50-gallon drums on the bicycle, probably full, I don't know that, you are. He's probably thankful he has a bicycle to carry him on. These are real people. This is Malawi. The same is true in Zambia. The same is true in Zimbabwe. People are suffering. People are without things that we take for granted every day. God has so richly blessed us, and He's blessed us to have fellowship in the gospel in that world, so that we might all be together in the world to come, where there will be no hunger or pain. We delivered some help